It all began on a night that was never supposed to happen. Madeline Brooks stood beneath the soft glow of a small restaurant in Santa Fe, clutching a borrowed purse and the fragile hope that $200 would be enough to cover another month's rent. All she had to do was pretend for one night, be a stranger's girlfriend. A simple deal. But when her eyes met his, something inside her shifted. There was a quiet sadness in Lucas Bennett, a look of a man who had everything except peace. Neither of them knew that this innocent mistake would become the turning point of their lives, a collision of pride, vulnerability, and the silent courage it takes to truly be seen. And what happened next, no one there could have imagined. If this story touches your heart, don't forget to leave a like. It helps the channel keep bringing stories that remind us what truly matters. Subscribe and tell us in the comments, where are you listening from? Your presence is what keeps these stories alive. The desert wind of Santa Fe blew softly that night, carrying the scent of dry earth and wild jasmine. The yellow streetlights flickered across the cobblestones, reflecting off the windows of small restaurants that still resisted the rush of the modern city. Inside one of them, La Estrella Azul, a cozy place with candles on the tables and soft Spanish music in the background, a woman in a navy blue dress hesitated at the entrance. Madeline Brooks took a deep breath. It was one of those nights when nervousness seems to have a taste, something between mettle and regret. She tucked a strand of red hair behind her ear, glanced again at her phone, and checked the time. 7:30 p.m., right on schedule. A fake date, $200 and rent covered for another month. Simple in theory. She worked as a public librarian, and even though she had devoted her life to books, dreams, and stories, reality always seemed harsher than anything she read in the quiet hours of the night. The library where she worked had a leaking roof, her paycheck barely covered the bills, and her cat, Mr. Whiskers, needed expensive medicine. So when a friend mentioned the app Pretend Date, Madeline thought maybe pretending for one night wasn't the worst sin. Still, as she waited for her supposed client, something deep inside her screamed that this was absurd. "You're not that kind of person," she whispered to herself. Yet, she walked in. The restaurant was a refuge of soft light and gentle voices, rustic wooden tables, the aroma of red wine and fresh olive oil. In the back, a man sat alone, looking through the menu. Dark hair, elegant suit, distant expression. When he looked up and smiled, a calm, almost shy smile, Madeline knew it had to be him. She approached, hesitant. "Lucas?" she asked, trying to sound confident. He raised his brows, surprised, then nodded politely. "Yes." "Madeline?" And that's how the most meaningful mistake of their lives began. The first minute was a disaster of awkward gestures and tangled words. Madeline, trying to sound professional, explained that she didn't do this often, and Lucas, equally confused, replied that this wasn't something he usually did either. The waiter brought water, they laughed nervously, and for a brief moment the world seemed to pause. Lucas Bennett, CEO of one of the largest tech holdings on the West Coast, was in Santa Fe for a few days, escaping a world where conversations were calculated, smiles rehearsed, and loneliness wrapped in gold. His assistant had arranged a blind date that evening, just a way to relax Mr. Bennett, and too tired to refuse, he simply showed up. Madeline, on the other hand, believed she was sitting across from a shy man who had paid not to be alone at a business dinner. She spoke quickly, trying to maintain her role as the temporary girlfriend without sounding fake. And he, intrigued, assumed this lively, spontaneous woman was the match his assistant had chosen. "So, what do you do?" Lucas asked, pouring some wine. "Me? I work in a library. And you?" "Technology." "Oh, like fixing computers." He gave a half-smile. "Something like that." Their clumsy, tentative dialogue began to flow more easily. Madeline spoke about the books she loved, the children who came to the library, the sacred silence between shelves. Lucas listened, captivated by her simplicity, so different from the people he usually met, all obsessed with appearances. There was something rare about her. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. With every laugh, the tension melted away. She admitted, a little embarrassed, that her dress was borrowed from a co-worker and her shoes were killing her feet. He instinctively slipped off his jacket and set it under the table so she could rest her feet on it. Madeline nearly cried from embarrassment but laughed. That simple gesture said more than 1,000 words. Then, in the middle of their conversation, Madeline's phone buzzed. A message from the app. "Your client is waiting outside, table 14. Her heart froze. She looked at Lucas, horrified. "Wait, you're not my client?" He blinked, confused. "Client?" The silence that followed was almost comical. Madeline covered her face with both hands. "Oh my God, I thought you were the guy from the app." Lucas needed a few seconds to process, and then burst out laughing. A genuine, contagious laugh that made Madeline want to disappear and laugh with him at the same time. "Well, that explains a lot," he said. "I think I just had the most interesting dinner of my life, by accident." Madeline apologized a dozen times, ready to leave, but he stopped her with a calm look. "Wait," he said, gesturing to the waiter. "Stay. It wouldn't be fair to end such an accidental evening so soon. You really want to have dinner with me after this? More than I did before," he answered honestly. She hesitated, then stayed. Between laughter and silence, the night went on. Lucas talked about his travels, about how people forget to watch the sunset when they're chasing results. Madeline told him she sometimes read to the elderly at the library because she believed every story deserves to be heard. And for the first time in a long while, both felt something they couldn't quite name: presence. At the end of the dinner, Lucas walked her to the door. The air was cooler now, the sky sprinkled with stars. "So," she said with a shy smile, "I guess I'll never be able to use dating apps again. And I guess I'll never be able to trust my assistant again," he replied, amused. They laughed together, a laugh carrying the strange sense that whatever this was, it wasn't meant to end just yet. For a moment his gaze lingered on hers. Madeline saw a deep loneliness there, not the kind that comes from being alone, but from not being truly seen. And without knowing why, she wanted to stay. To understand who he was, behind the suit, the control, and the calm. Lucas, in turn, couldn't shake the image of her. The woman who had apologized 10 times and still made him laugh in a way he hadn't in years. When she got into her car and drove off, he stood on the sidewalk for a while, watching the red taillights fade into the night. Then came a feeling that startled him. Longing, after less than 2 hours. Meanwhile, as Madeline drove through the quiet streets, she caught her own reflection in the car window and whispered, bewildered, "What just happened?" The wind of Santa Fe blew once more, carrying the scent of jasmine and a question that lingered in the air. Could it be that life's greatest coincidences are never just mistakes? The next morning, Santa Fe woke to that kind of golden light that seems to heal whatever the night left undone. But for Madeline, the sunlight only made the embarrassment of the night before shine brighter. Lying on the couch with Mr. Whiskers purring on her lap, she replayed every second of that accidental dinner, like a tragic comedy about her own life. How could I mistake a billionaire for a client from an app, she thought. But deep down, what unsettled her wasn't the mistake itself. It was his smile, that calm, gentle, human smile. There was something about Lucas Bennett that didn't fit into the cold image of a businessman, and that confused her more than she wanted to admit. Meanwhile, miles away, Lucas drank his morning coffee in silence on the hotel balcony. The mountains on the horizon shimmered with copper tones, and the desert air carried a rare kind of peace. He thought about Madeline, the way she spoke with her hands, her spontaneous laugh, her raw honesty. It was strange. In a world of meetings, numbers, and endless planning, she had been the one unexpected thing that made him feel alive. On impulse, he picked up his phone, typed Madeline Brooks, and found the City Library's website. Her picture appeared, smiling beside a group of children, on a simple page titled Community Reading Programs. He stared at it, feeling a quiet mix of fascination and respect. In that moment, he decided, he wanted to see her again. 2 days later, Madeline stood behind the library counter, surrounded by piles of returned books and the familiar rustle of turning pages. This was her refuge. The place smelled of old paper, reheated coffee, and cheap soap, a scent that, to her, meant home. Then she heard the door creak open. "Good morning," said a familiar voice. She looked up and froze. There he was, holding a bouquet of white daisies and wearing a smile that blended charm with shyness. "I thought simple flowers suited you better," Lucas said. Madeline blinked, stunned. "How did you—" "I looked for you," he admitted, honest and unguarded. "And no, it's not stalking. I just thought I owed you an apology for, well, being part of the craziest dinner in history." She tried not to laugh, and failed. "I think the apology should be mine." "Then we're even," he replied, handing her the flowers. That small gesture broke through her defenses. Over the following days, Lucas started visiting the library often. Sometimes he'd say he was just passing by, but somehow he always stayed. He helped carry boxes, read stories to children, and, for reasons even he couldn't explain, seemed genuinely happy there. At first, Madeline felt out of place, a billionaire among crooked bookshelves and flickering lights. It was surreal, but with time she realized he wasn't there out of pity. He was there because he wanted to be. Their conversations became the highlight of her afternoons. They talked about everything, books, music, and how the world had forgotten the beauty of simple things. Lucas shared stories about his travels and business, but without the need to impress. He spoke like a man who finally wanted to be heard, not admired. Madeline, in turn, shared small fragments of her life: her father's early death, her mother's endless temporary jobs, her fight to keep the library alive. In every story, he saw quiet strength, a courage that didn't shout but endured. And she saw in him a man who, behind all the power and prestige, was starving for meaning. One afternoon, as the golden light filtered through the windows, Lucas asked, "Why do you work here, Madeline? You could earn so much more somewhere else." She smiled softly. "Because here, people still believe knowledge can change something. Does it? Sometimes. And when it doesn't, it gives hope." "I think that's already a lot." He stayed silent for a moment, watching her, like someone recognizing a truth he'd been chasing. "You're different from anyone I've ever met," he murmured. Madeline looked away, cheeks flushed. "Careful. That's usually the kind of line people regret later." He laughed, and his laugh filled the room like music. As time went by, their friendship turned into something subtler, a presence they both sought without needing to name it. Lucas began to notice the small things: the way she bit her lip when focused, the pencil she used to pin up her hair, the way she treated every visitor like they mattered. And Madeline noticed his human side, the weariness behind his confidence, the silences heavy with thought. One evening, after closing time, she found him waiting outside with 2 cups of coffee. "You're still here?" she asked, surprised. "I told you I'd take you for a real coffee." "And I keep my promises," he said with a crooked smile. They walked through the quiet streets of Santa Fe, talking about everything and nothing. Lucas shared how his father had died when he was a teenager, and how loneliness taught him to hide behind success. Madeline admitted she'd always feared needing someone too much, because every time she trusted, she ended up being left behind. Silence fell between them. The faint sound of a guitar drifted from a nearby bar. Lucas looked at her, calm and sincere. "Maybe we just need to learn not to run from the right people." She gave a sad smile. And how do we know who they are? We don't. We just feel it. His words echoed inside her long after. When they reached the library door, the goodbye lasted a little too long to be just between friends. Lucas extended his hand, and Madeline held it a moment longer than she should have. The touch was brief, but full of silent promises. And there, beneath the amber glow of the streetlights, something shifted. It wasn't instant passion, nor empty infatuation. It was recognition, as if, after so many masks, they had finally found someone who truly saw them. That night, Madeline couldn't sleep. She replayed every word, every gesture, trying to understand what was happening. He's from another world, she thought, and I'm just trying to survive in mine. Yet her heart kept warming at the thought of him. Across the city, Lucas was awake too. On his phone screen, a blinking cursor hovered over an unsent message. "Can I see you tomorrow?" He deleted it and sighed. He didn't want to scare her off or seem too forward, but deep down, he knew. She had already become part of what he called peace. It was nearly midnight when Madeline's phone buzzed. A simple message. No emojis, no exaggeration. "I hope Mr. Whiskers is feeling better. Good night." She smiled, her heart racing, and replied, "He is. He purrs every time I talk about you. Good night, Lucas." The silence that followed was both sweet and unsettling, the kind that comes just before the inevitable. And without realizing it, they had already begun something irreversible, a feeling that grew slowly, but deep enough to change the course of their lives. The days that followed brought an odd kind of calm, the kind that only exists when something deep is about to change. Lucas kept visiting the library whenever he could, and Madeline, though pretending it was just friendship, knew there was something more. The air between them felt heavier, charged with an unspoken tension, but she didn't know who he really was. And he, for reasons he couldn't quite explain, chose not to tell her. That weekend, Lucas invited her to dinner again. This time, it was at a quiet riverside restaurant, lit by copper-stringed lanterns that swayed gently in the evening breeze. The sound of flowing water mingled with the distant laughter of diners and the faint scent of lavender carried by the wind. Madeline, in a simple green dress and the same borrowed shoes, tried to appear confident. Lucas, on the other hand, seemed different, more reserved, as though carrying a secret that grew heavier by the minute. During dinner she noticed the glances from nearby tables, whispered words, subtle yet unmistakable. A couple seated not far away exchanged looks after recognizing him. Madeline pretended not to notice, but Lucas did, and the discomfort hit him like a quiet blade. Trying to lighten the mood, she smiled. "You always seem so calm. I bet you're never late for anything." "If I told you how many meetings I've missed, you wouldn't believe me," he said, relieved by the shift in tone. "Meetings? For work?" "Many. And then tell me, Mr. Something in Technology, what exactly do you do?" she asked playfully. He hesitated. For a moment the words seemed stuck in his throat. Before he could answer, the waiter approached, his tone suddenly formal. "Mr. Bennett, will you be having your usual dessert tonight, sir?" The world stopped for Madeline. Mr. Bennett. The name cracked through her like lightning. She had heard it before, many times. Lucas Bennett, the man from the headlines. The visionary who built one of the nation's biggest tech empires, the billionaire featured in Forbes, symbol of innovation and success. She stared at him, color draining from her face. "Lucas Bennett," she whispered. He exhaled. "I was going to tell you. I just didn't know how." "You're the Lucas Bennett, the owner of Bennett Global." He nodded, tense. Madeline leaned back, stunned. The river's murmur seemed to fade, and the lights around her grew too bright. Her stomach twisted, not in anger, but in something deeper, distance, that invisible divide between those who have everything and those who have to fight for every small piece. "So," she began, her voice trembling, The man I accidentally had dinner with was a billionaire. I'm still the same man, Madeline. Nothing's changed. Everything's changed, she cut in bitterly. You could have told me. I wanted you to see me as someone ordinary, he said, sincere, just for a while. And why would that matter? You're anything but ordinary. He met her eyes, and in that moment there was pain. Because when you talk to me, I feel human. The words slipped out before he could stop them. The simplest truth, and yet the hardest to say. But Madeline, wounded, couldn't hear it the way he meant it. The weight of inequality, of experience, of her own history, rose between them like a wall. I grew up watching my mother beg for loans, working 2 jobs just to give me a chance to study, she said, her voice breaking. You live in a world where no one has to beg for anything. And that makes me your enemy? No. It just reminds me that I don't belong in yours. The silence between them felt almost physical. The waiter returned with the check. Lucas paid without looking. Madeline watched, uneasy, as that simple gesture, the effortless slide of a card, seemed to represent everything she feared, the power to solve what she could barely face. When they stepped outside, the night was cold. The wind carried the sound of the river and the rustle of leaves. She folded her arms, more to protect herself than from the chill. Madeline, he began gently, I never meant to deceive you. I just wanted to know what it feels like to be treated like a normal person for a day. I wanted to be seen, without the name, without the money, without the walls people build when they find out who I am. Her tears came before she could hold them back. And I just wanted a life where I didn't have to feel small. Lucas stepped forward instinctively, but she took a step back. Don't try to fix this with promises, Lucas. I'm not a problem you can solve. He froze, his hands empty, eyes heavy. Her words cut straight to the truth he'd been avoiding, that everything in his life could be solved with resources, solutions, power. But not this, not her. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. Thank you for dinner, but I think this is where we end it. Lucas stood motionless as she walked away. Each step sounded like something he was losing, piece by piece. The cold wind rattled the lanterns above, and he remained there, alone, trying to understand when a simple mistake had turned into something that hurt this much. That night, Madeline came home and let the dress fall to the floor. She looked at herself in the mirror, the same mirror she faced every morning before going out to fight another day, and barely recognized the woman staring back. Tired eyes, red-rimmed lids. It felt like being pulled out of a beautiful dream and thrown back into reality. She thought of his eyes, his sincerity, the truth in his words. But pride spoke louder. He'll never understand what it means to need someone, she whispered. Across town, Lucas stared into a half-empty glass of wine. The city lights reflected on the hotel window, and the silence around him screamed. He couldn't shake the sound of her voice, the tremor in her words, the hurt in her eyes. Maybe she's right, he thought. Maybe I really don't understand. Yet something inside him stirred, an old restlessness, a desire to prove he was more than the name printed in magazines. The next morning he called his assistant. Carmen, I need a favor. Of course, Mr. Bennett, what do you need? I want you to gather everything you can about the Santa Fe Public Library. A pause. Miss Brooks's library. Yes, but don't involve her in any way. Not yet. Meanwhile, Madeline tried to drown herself in work, burying her feelings in stacks of books. But the heart is stubborn. No matter how she tried to convince herself it was over, his memory lingered in everything, his laugh, the way he listened, the quiet strength in his gaze. And sometimes, in the middle of a long, silent evening, she'd whisper to herself, "Is he thinking about me too?" It was nearly 10 p.m. when she locked up the library. The streets were empty, swept by the cold autumn wind. Above her, the sky shimmered with stars that seemed to watch in silence. In that moment, Madeline had no idea that the man she was trying to forget was about to do something that would change everything once again. But what he was planning was still far from being understood. The days passed slowly, the kind of slowness that makes time itself feel like punishment. Madeline tried to keep her routine as if nothing had happened. The library, the books, the children running between the shelves, the lukewarm coffee in a chipped mug. Everything looked the same. But she wasn't. Her last encounter with Lucas had left invisible marks. She saw him in every silence, in every memory that refused to fade. The problem wasn't his money. It was the distance it created, the idea that some people could buy time, solutions, second chances, while she barely managed to pay the power bill before the cut-off notice arrived. And yet, sometimes when the wind slipped through the open windows, she remembered his voice, low, calm, and tired, more than proud. And despite herself, she missed him. Across town, Lucas couldn't focus on anything. Meetings, reports, shareholders, all of it blurred into background noise. Between calls, he would open the library's website and scroll through old photos of community events. Children sitting on the floor, elderly people smiling, Madeline in the middle, always with that quiet light in her eyes that no hardship could dim. That was what drew him in, the kind of strength that couldn't be bought. A week later, he did what he had promised himself he would do. He went to the library. This time, no security guards, no luxury car, no entourage. Just him, in a simple shirt, carrying the look of a man who wanted to ask for forgiveness but didn't know how. The bell above the door chimed softly as he entered. Madeline looked up, and for a second everything stopped. She stood with her back to the light of the window, a golden beam catching in her hair. For a moment, Lucas wanted to say something simple. "I missed you." But the words stuck in his throat. She took a slow breath, keeping her composure. "Here to return a book, Mr. Bennet." Her tone was polite, but distant. He smiled, accepting the sting. "I came to return something that never got its ending." She crossed her arms. "If this is about dinner, that chapter's already closed." "Not for me." The silence was heavy. The clock on the wall read 5:04 p.m., and the faint sound of a child turning pages nearby was the only thing alive in the room. Lucas looked around. The worn furniture, the crooked shelves, the mended curtains. Everything so simple and so full of soul. "I didn't come here to apologize for who I am," he said finally. "I came because I don't want you to think what I feel is pity." She let out a humorless laugh. "Pity is what rich people feel for a moment before they go back to their world. Then maybe you should give me time to prove I'm not one of them." Her eyes faltered. Just a flicker, but enough to crack her armor. There was truth in his voice. And something rarer still. Vulnerability. "You don't know what it's like to live afraid of needing someone," she whispered. "Afraid to want something that could vanish tomorrow." "I know more than you think," he said quietly. "I've spent years surrounded by people who only stay as long as they need something from me. The fear's the same, only the backdrop changes." Madeline said nothing, letting his words settle, and for the first time, she believed him. From that day on, something shifted. He started showing up again, not intruding, just being there. Sometimes with coffee, sometimes just sitting silently while she worked. He didn't try to impress her or talk about business. He was simply present, steady, human, real. One afternoon, a storm rolled over the city. The children had gone home, and the library was nearly empty. Madeline struggled to shut the windows as the cold wind swept through the room. Without thinking, Lucas took off his jacket and placed it over her shoulders. She turned toward him and their eyes met. Something passed between them, quiet, powerful, undeniable. "You should be in some important meeting," she said, trying to ease the tension. "I am," he murmured, "the most important one today." She smiled, and time seemed to hold its breath. Outside, thunder rolled, but inside the only sound was their mingled breathing. Without realizing it, Lucas stepped closer, and the world shrank to the space between them. Madeline's heart pounded. "Lucas!" "I know." And there, between the scent of wet paper and the hum of rain, their lips met. Slow, deep, as if afraid the moment would dissolve too soon. It wasn't just a kiss, it was a confession. "I see you, even when the world tries to erase you." When they finally pulled apart, Madeline rested her forehead against his chest, too overwhelmed to speak. Lucas held her gently, saying nothing, honoring the fragile mix of fear and longing that lived inside her. No more masks. Just two souls trying to understand what it meant to belong to each other in a world that said they shouldn't. In the days that followed, life bloomed with new color. They met often, sometimes at the library, sometimes for quiet walks through the park at sunset. Lucas began to rediscover the joy of small things. Ice cream melting too fast, the smell of popcorn on the wind, Madeline's unguarded laughter. And she began to see that beneath his success, he wasn't made of arrogance but of solitude. One night, sitting on the curb outside the closed library, Lucas asked softly, "Have you ever thought about what you'd do if you could change something?" "A lot," she said. "I'd start with this place. The library needs repairs, new computers, more space for the kids." "What's stopping you?" "Money," she said flatly. "The thing you have too much of, and I never have enough." He said nothing, but his eyes grew distant, thoughtful. Inside, a dangerous but beautiful idea began to form. Not to impress her, but to help her keep alive the one thing that gave her life meaning. Madeline, unaware, rested her head on his shoulder. "I just wish the world were fairer," she whispered. "That people like you didn't have to choose between having everything and feeling alone. And people like me didn't have to choose between dreaming and surviving." Lucas smiled sadly. "Maybe we can start changing that together." She looked at him, surprised. Together. Together. The air hummed with the sound of cicadas, and the breeze carried the faint perfume of night-blooming flowers. For a moment, everything felt possible. That night, Madeline dreamed of the sea. She was in a small boat, and Lucas was reaching out to help her aboard. But every time she got closer, the water rose between them, an ocean that refused to let them touch. She woke up breathless, her heart racing. Outside her window, dawn painted the sky in shades of orange. "I'm falling for him," she thought, terrified, "and it might destroy me." Meanwhile, in Lucas's Los Angeles office, his assistant Carmen Rivera watched him carefully. "You seem different," she said, breaking the silence. "Different how?" "Less armored." He smiled faintly. "Maybe someone reminded me there's life beyond spreadsheets." But Carmen already knew what he was planning. On his desk lay documents for the purchase of several properties in the Santa Fe area, among them an old building with a worn facade, the public library. "You're really going to do this without telling her?" she asked cautiously. "Not yet," he replied. "I don't want her to think I'm trying to buy what we have. I just want to make sure her world doesn't fall apart." She nodded, though worry lingered in her eyes. Because she knew secrets, even the well-intentioned ones, have a way of becoming divides. Back in Santa Fe, Madeline lived between euphoria and fear. With Lucas, everything felt lighter, until the world reminded them they came from different planets. A dinner in a small restaurant could turn into a spectacle, whispers following them. A simple walk could draw curious stares, and she began to wonder if love alone could bridge realities that far apart. Still, every time he appeared, calm, steady, kind, the fear grew quieter. There was something real between them, something that grew even when she tried to hold it back. One evening, as the sun sank behind the mountains, Madeline looked at him and asked, "Why me?" He took his time before answering. Because you're the first person who doesn't try to change who I am. She smiled faintly. And maybe I'm the first person who can't be bought. Exactly, he said softly. And there, between laughter and unspoken promises, love began to bloom. A quiet, imperfect, but real love, born from a mistake, sustained by truth, and threatened by the secrets yet to be revealed. Outside, the wind carried the scent of coming rain, and fate, patient as ever, waited for its next turn. On the morning Lucas decided to officially visit the library, the sun rose lazily over Santa Fe, painting the sky in shades of copper and rose. It was a Friday, children's reading hour, the busiest day of the week. Madeline arrived early, as always, balancing a stack of books and a cup of cold coffee. The air smelled of old paper, crayons, and hope. The building was old, its walls cracked and lights flickering, but she loved it like someone protecting a sacred refuge. To her, this place was more than a job. It was a mission. Here, children without toys found whole worlds inside the pages. Here, the forgotten elderly were remembered with tenderness. Here, loneliness had a cure. As she arranged the colorful cushions on the floor, the soft chime above the door rang. She turned, and her heart skipped. Lucas stood in the doorway, no suit, no expensive watch, none of the untouchable businessman's aura. He wore a white linen shirt with rolled sleeves and a smile that carried something new. Humility. Madeline took a deep breath. "Here to rescue another historical building?" she teased, trying to mask her nerves. "Just returning the book you lent me," he replied, holding up The Little Prince. "And? What did you think? That it's impossible to read it without thinking of you?" She rolled her eyes, but the smile slipped out anyway. As they spoke, a group of children ran up to Madeline, shouting her name with excitement. Lucas watched silently, the sparkle in their eyes, the warmth in the way she knelt to listen, how every story she told became a living adventure. It was a simple scene, yet to him it was utterly captivating. "She's kind of a superhero, you know," said a little blonde girl, grabbing his hand naturally. "Is she?" "Yeah, she makes us believe books have souls." Lucas smiled, his chest tightening. That sentence echoed inside him in a way nothing in his corporate world ever had. There, surrounded by the joyful noise of children, he understood what Madeline meant to that place, and maybe to the world. By late morning, the library began to empty. Madeline invited him to see the basement, where they kept old and donated books. The air was cool and smelled of dust and damp wood. Dim lights cast long shadows over overflowing shelves. "This is the heart of the library," she said. "Everything we can't afford to lose lives here." Lucas ran his fingers over the worn spines, feeling the weight of time. "This is incredible, Madeline. It's a miracle, really. The city's been trying to shut this place down for years. Says it doesn't turn a profit." She spoke without noticing the flicker in his eyes, because Lucas already knew. He knew too well. He had a meeting scheduled that very week with the mayor about purchasing properties in the area. Among them was this building. He swallowed hard. He couldn't tell her yet. "Not now," Madeline sighed. "Sometimes I feel like I'm trying to hold up the world with empty hands." Lucas stepped closer. "And yet you do more with those hands than most people with full ones." She looked away, emotion flickering across her face. There was truth in his voice, and a quiet reverence that reached her deeply. In the days that followed, Lucas began helping, quietly. He arranged to have the roof repaired, listed as an anonymous donation. He sent new computers through a partner foundation, and he organized cultural events to draw attention and support. Madeline was surprised by the changes, but assumed they came from local campaigns. She believed in small miracles, not invisible hands. But inevitably, their worlds began to collide. One Saturday afternoon, Lucas showed up to help with a used book fair. He wore jeans and a simple t-shirt, but he still drew attention. A few people recognized him. Whispers spread. "That's the CEO of Bennett Global." What's he doing here? Maybe he's buying the building. Madeline noticed the stairs, and her stomach tightened. That feeling of being out of place came rushing back. While she carried boxes, an older woman muttered loudly, "Rich folks love showing up for the cameras, don't they?" Madeline froze. Lucas heard it. He approached quietly. "Not every kind of help needs applause, ma'am. Sometimes it just needs silence." The woman fell silent. Madeline stood there, stunned, but deep inside something cracked, a mix of gratitude and discomfort. Why was he there? Why did he care so much? At the end of the event, she found him leaning against the wooden fence, watching the sunset. "You didn't have to do that," she said softly. "Do what? Be here? Help? Pretend you belong in this place?" Lucas turned, hurt flashing in his eyes. "I'm not pretending, Madeline." "Yes, you are. You don't understand what it's like to fight for something money can't fix." "Can't I? Then tell me, what exactly can't money fix?" "The fear of being a burden, the shame of asking for help, the pride of standing when no one's watching." The silence that followed was heavy. Lucas looked away, both moved and wounded. "Maybe you underestimate me. Maybe you live in a world where people don't have to believe just to keep going. I live in one where faith is what gets me out of bed every morning." She turned away, holding back tears. Lucas didn't follow. He just watched her go, undone, challenged, humbled. And in that moment, he realized what he felt for her was more than love. It was admiration, a desire to become someone worthy. That night, Madeline stayed late, stacking books no one read anymore. The silence pressed in, and still she could hear his voice in her mind. Then came the sound of rain outside, and the drip of a leak over an old shelf. She grabbed a bucket and sighed. "It's always like this. I fix, I patch, and still everything keeps breaking." But then she looked around. The worn walls, the photos of smiling kids, the donated books, and thought that maybe love was exactly that, caring for what everyone else had given up on. The next day, Lucas came back. He said nothing about their argument. He just showed up, helped fix the leak, and stayed beside her in silence. And in that quiet, Madeline realized something. He wasn't trying to fix her. He was trying to walk with her. For a brief moment their eyes met and she smiled, tired but at peace. "You know, Lucas, sometimes I think this place has a heart of its own." "It does," he replied softly. "And I know who keeps it beating." She laughed, shaking her head. Outside, the rain drummed softly on the roof, mingling with the gentle rustle of turning pages. And in that moment, something between them changed again, not in a rush, but in a quiet understanding. They came from different worlds, but love might just be the one language they both spoke fluently. The day ended with the sunset spilling through the windows in shades of gold and lilac. Lucas watched Madeline stack books, her hair loosely tied, her face glowing in the fading light. He thought, silently, that he had never seen anything so beautiful. She looked up, catching his gaze and returning his smile. For a moment time stopped, then her phone rang. A call from City Hall. The voice on the other end was cold, factual. The building was set to be sold soon. Her smile vanished. Lucas saw it happen but said nothing. He just closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and knew that the secret he'd been hiding was about to become a wound. The news of the library's sale hit Madeline like a sentence. She stood frozen on the phone, listening to the monotone voice from City Hall. "The building will be transferred to private investors in the coming weeks. We're finalizing contracts and preparing the paperwork." When the call ended, the sound of the world grew faint. She leaned against the wall, her legs weak beneath her. The library, the heart of the community, the home of so many stories, was about to disappear. Lucas immediately sensed something was wrong. "Madeline!" She looked up, her voice trembling. "They're selling it, the building, the library." He took her by the shoulders, trying to steady her. "I promise that's not going to happen." How can you promise that? Because I can fix it. The words were honest, but they landed like a blow. Madeline took a step back, hurt. That's the problem, Lucas. For you, everything can be fixed. For me, it's about surviving. The silence between them was sharp. Outside, the wind whistled through the trees, carrying dry leaves down the street. Lucas tried again. I just want to help. And I just want to stand on my own. She walked to the window, staring at the empty road. When I was little, my mom used to say that taking too much help was the same as giving away your ground. And what's wrong with taking a helping hand? Nothing, as long as that hand doesn't make you feel small. He stood still, the invisible distance between them stretching wide again, the same divide they thought they'd crossed. Madeline drew a long breath, steadying her voice. Lucas, I know your heart's in the right place, but what you call kindness sometimes feels like charity to me. It's not charity, he said firmly. It's love. Love doesn't pay bills, but it holds up everything worth fighting for. She turned to him, eyes glistening. You think you can save everything with money, but the love I need can't be bought, donated, or signed into a contract. Her words struck deep. Lucas looked down, his voice breaking. I don't know how to love any other way, Madeline. Life taught me that everything has a price, and if I don't pay it, I lose it. She stepped closer, her tone soft but resolute. Then maybe it's time to learn. The silence that followed was heavy, full of truths neither of them knew how to name. In the days that followed, something between them shifted. There was no fight, no formal goodbye, just a quiet distance, like two people trying to protect what little still held them together. Lucas kept coming to the library, but Madeline had changed. Her smiles were polite now, her eyes dimmer. She moved with the quiet determination of someone trying to prove something, to him, to herself, to the world. One afternoon, she found him in the hallway, helping a child use one of the new computers. The boy grinned. He taught me how to type my name. Madeline froze. Where did this computer come from? She asked carefully. It was donated, Lucas replied without hesitation. By whom? Someone who believes in your work. She closed her eyes, exhaling in frustration. Lucas, she sighed, you promised you wouldn't. I didn't promise anything, and if I did, I lied to myself. I can't stand by and watch you fight alone. Madeline looked at him, anger and affection tangled in her expression. And you don't see that that's exactly what hurts me? I've spent my whole life proving that what little I have is enough. And then you show up and make me feel like it never will be. Lucas had no reply. She went on, her voice trembling. I don't want a hero, Lucas. I want someone who trusts me, even when I have nothing to offer. He took a step toward her, but she stepped back. The space between them had become a minefield. That night, Madeline stayed late, reorganizing forgotten books, trying to piece her life back together. Outside, rain poured down, streaking the old windows. As she worked, she noticed an envelope on her desk. Her name was written in a steady, familiar hand. She opened it slowly. Inside was a check, enough to keep the library running for an entire year. No sender's name, but she didn't need one. Her chest tightened. Tears fell quietly as she sat down. The gesture was beautiful, and it hurt. Because it proved what she feared most. Lucas could turn even pain into a solution. She placed the check in a drawer and switched off the lights. Before leaving, she whispered to the dark, You still don't understand, Lucas. I don't want to be saved. I want to be chosen, even when I can't be bought. Across town, Carmen Rivera watched Lucas from her desk, uneasy. Mr. Bennett, she began softly, sometimes you try to love the same way you run a company. He frowned. And what's wrong with that? The problem is people aren't projects. They don't have progress reports. He leaned back, thoughtful. Do you think she hates me? I think she's afraid to need you, Carmen said gently. And fear, Mr. Bennett, often speaks louder than love. He said nothing for a long time, staring out at the city. Below, the lights shimmered like stars trapped in concrete. Maybe I need to relearn how to care without control, he thought. Meanwhile, Madeline tried to convince herself she was doing the right thing. But the heart doesn't follow logic. She missed him. The easy laughter, the long talks, the way he made her feel seen. But fear still ruled her. Fear of losing herself in a life that wasn't hers. One morning, as she arrived at the library, she found him waiting outside. He held 2 cups of coffee, his eyes tired but soft. "No checks this time," he said gently. "Just coffee." She hesitated, then took it. They walked together through the quiet aisles, the air between them fragile but still warm. "I want to understand," he said at last. "Why is it so hard for you to accept help?" Madeline thought for a long moment. "Because when someone saves you, they always expect something in return, and I've lived through that before." Lucas grew serious. "I don't expect anything, Madeline." "Yes, you do. You expect me to forgive you, for existing in a world that reminds me of everything I'll never have." He flinched, wounded. "So that's it? You see me as the enemy?" "No, just as someone who reminds me that love and inequality don't mix." The words hung in the air, sharp and painful. Lucas set his cup down and drew a slow breath. Maybe they don't, but maybe that's exactly why they're worth trying for. She looked at him for a long moment, and for once had no answer. Only pain and love, blended like rain and dust. In the days that followed, he stopped coming. Madeline felt the emptiness immediately, though she pretended not to. She buried herself in work, but the ache remained, especially when her eyes drifted to the corner where he used to sit. On the 7th day, the library phone rang. "Miss Brooks," a voice said, "this is Carmen Rivera, Mr. Bennett's assistant. He asked me to inform you that he'll no longer be involved in the local project." Madeline froze. "Project?" she echoed. "Yes, I think it's best if he explains." But he didn't. Not that day, not the next. She closed her eyes, her chest tight. That silence wasn't absence, it was surrender. The kind that comes when love stops fighting, or when pride wins. Outside, autumn crept in slowly. Leaves drifted over the library roof, and the chill in the air felt like it came from inside her. As the sun set, Madeline watched the fading light and thought, maybe true love isn't the one that saves you, but the one that lets you go. But what she didn't know was that while she was learning to let go, Lucas was about to prove the opposite, that love can stand beside you without taking away your ground. The October wind arrived cold, sweeping through the streets of Santa Fe with an air of ending and of warning. The trees had begun to shed their leaves, and inside, the library seemed to mirror their weariness. Tired, quiet, on the edge of collapse. Madeline worked in silence, folding flyers for one last fundraising event. It was their final attempt before the city's deadline to shut down operations. Donations were low, volunteers were drained, and Lucas had disappeared. In recent days, she tried to convince herself he had moved on, but her heart betrayed her. Every time the wind tapped at the window, she remembered his voice and the silence that had replaced it. At that very moment, Lucas sat in a cold, glass-walled conference room in Los Angeles. Blueprints and contracts were projected onto the wall. Among them, a familiar name flickered on the screen. Property number 74, Santa Fe Public Library. Carmen watched him carefully. "Mr. Bennett, are you sure you want to go through with this?" she asked softly. "Yes, I want the building transferred to a new foundation." "In whose name?" "In hers." Carmen hesitated. "Does she know?" Lucas shook his head. "Not yet. I'll tell her when it's done." He truly believed he was doing the right thing, saving the place she loved, protecting what gave her life meaning. But fate has its irony. The more we try to protect someone, the more our secrets become weapons. 3 days later, Madeline received a call from City Hall. The voice on the other end was cheerful. "Miss Brooks, great news. A corporation made a generous offer. The library won't be demolished. It's being purchased and renovated." She froze. "A corporation? Which one?" "Bennett Global Holdings. Seems the CEO has big plans for the place." The ground fell from under her feet. For a long moment the world went silent. All she could hear was the thundering of her own heart. Lucas. He had bought the library. But to her, the gesture wasn't love. It was control. She remembered every time she'd said she didn't want to be anyone's charity project, every plea for him to let her fight her own battles. And now he had done exactly what she feared most, decided for her. That afternoon, the sky darkened and rain scented the wind. Madeline crossed the city with determined steps and tear-bright eyes. The Bennett Global building in Santa Fe gleamed, all glass and steel, the complete opposite of her world. She walked in without an appointment, carrying anger and heartbreak in equal measure. Carmen spotted her and froze. "Miss Brooks, he's in a meeting," but Madeline was already inside. The glass doors swung open, revealing Lucas standing beside a table strewn with documents. He turned, startled. "Madeline!" She took a deep breath, her voice trembling but steady. "So this was it. Your grand gesture, buying my life and wrapping it in a contract." The words hit him before she finished speaking. "I didn't buy your life. I saved the library." "Saved it? Or just proved I'll always need you to survive?" He stepped closer, desperate to explain. "I did it for us. For you." "No!" she cried, tears breaking through. "You did it out of guilt, because you can't stand losing control." The silence that followed was suffocating. Rain began to fall outside, tapping against the glass like a slow, sad applause. Lucas spoke again, softly. "You think this was easy? That I didn't question myself every step? I just wanted to make sure the place you love would still exist." "And what was I supposed to do?" she shot back. "Say thank you? Get on my knees and say thank you, Mr. Bennett?" Her pain was sharper than anger. Lucas drew a shaky breath, his chest tightening. "I never wanted you to feel small." "But you did." She turned away, tears streaming freely now. "You could have trusted me. You could have told me." "I was afraid you'd say no. And I did." She started to walk away, but he reached out, catching her arm. The touch was brief, but it carried the weight of everything left unsaid. "Madeline, let go." She pulled free, her gaze cutting through him. "I'm not your cause, Lucas. I'm not something that needs fixing." And with that she left, the sound of the doors closing behind her like a final verdict. Lucas stood frozen, heart breaking under the weight of his own good intentions. Outside, the rain followed Madeline home. Soaked and trembling, she stepped inside, dropped her bag to the floor, and collapsed onto the couch, crying until her body ached. The image wouldn't leave her. The sterile room, the contracts, his helpless eyes. She loved him. That was the tragedy, because love isn't enough when it comes wrapped in silence and imbalance. Across town, Lucas sat alone in the dark office. His reflection stared back at him from the window, hollow, defeated. Her words wouldn't stop echoing. "I'm not your cause." He wondered how many times he had turned love into an act of control without even realizing it. Carmen appeared quietly at the door. "May I say something, Mr. Bennett?" "Of course. You did it out of love." But she needed to feel capable, and by trying to help you proved the opposite. Lucas ran a hand through his hair, exhausted. "So, what do I do now?" "Let her fight, and fight with her, not for her." He closed his eyes, the words hitting something deep. "And if she never forgives me? Then at least she'll know you finally loved her the right way, even if it came too late." The following days were grey. Madeline ignored his calls and messages. The library stayed open, but the air inside felt like goodbye. Even with the news that it would be renovated, she couldn't celebrate. What's the point of saving the place, she thought, if I lost myself in the process? The children still came, the stories were still told, but her smile had faded. Sometimes she'd catch herself staring out the window, waiting to see a familiar black car, and hating herself for hoping. One afternoon, Carmen showed up at the library. Dressed simply, she held an envelope. "He asked me to give you this," she said, placing it on the desk. Madeline didn't want to open it. "Tell him he can't buy me with letters either." "He's not trying to buy you, Madeline. He's apologizing. And he cancelled the purchase." Madeline looked up, startled. "Cancelled?" "Yes. The building's going back to the city. But he also said he won't let what you built here die." She hesitated, then opened the envelope. Inside was a single handwritten note. "I don't want to be the man who saves you. I want to be the man who walks beside you while you save what you believe in. L." The tears came before she could stop them. She sat there looking around, at the shelves, the children, the familiar scent of paper and ink. Everything was still there, and maybe, in a quiet way, so was he. That night, Madeline stayed late once more. She turned off the lights, lit a single candle on the desk, and sat in silence. The desert wind whispered through the cracks, carrying the soft rhythm of distant rain. She thought of everything, the mistake, the dinners, the kiss, the love, the pride. None of it had been perfect, but maybe love wasn't meant to be. She glanced at the envelope one last time and whispered, "You still don't understand, Lucas, but you're starting to." Across the city, under the same sky, Lucas looked out his window too. Two wounded hearts, separated by pride, bound by something neither distance nor silence could erase. And so caught between anger and love, between goodbye and not yet, fate waited. Because some stories only learn how to bloom after they've been broken first. The city felt colder since they'd stopped speaking. Santa Fe, once alive and warm with color and light, now dragged itself through shades of gray, as if even the sun had decided to hide. Madeline felt it in everything. In the coffee that cooled too fast, in the children's softer voices as they came to read, in the heavy silence that filled her nights. Since the day she discovered the library's purchase, nothing had felt the same. She still did all she'd always done, read stories, cared for the shelves, welcomed whoever came through the door. But now each gesture felt like a quiet attempt not to think of him, not to remember the eyes that had once seen her like no one ever had. Across the miles, Lucas lived inside his own absence. The mansion in Los Angeles was too large, too hollow. The ticking of the clock was the only sound that kept him company through sleepless nights. Everything that used to matter, the meetings, the deals, the power, now seemed faded, meaningless. He tried to convince himself he'd done the right thing by leaving her alone. But what's right rarely aligns with what the heart understands. Sometimes, late at night, he would unlock his phone and open their old messages. The last one was still there, unread. If I could go back, I'd listen before trying to fix. He'd turn off the screen, rub his face, and return to silence. Surrounded by everything money could buy, he had never felt poorer. Back at the library, Madeline filled the emptiness with work. She launched a reading drive, refurbished a small section with local donations, and started a Sunday community project. From the outside, she was still the same, strong, focused, admired, but inside, cracks had begun to show. One grey afternoon, Carmen appeared quietly. Madeline wasn't surprised. She simply greeted her with a tired smile. "Here to borrow a book, Carmen?" "No, to deliver a message," the assistant replied, taking a seat in the children's section. "If it's from him, I don't want to hear it," Madeline said, before she could go on. Carmen sighed. "Then listen, as if it isn't." Madeline crossed her arms, guarded. Carmen looked at her gently. "He's shut down all his personal ventures. Selling part of the company. He said he needs to start over. Madeline looked away, her heart racing. And that's supposed to impress me. No, Carmen said softly. It's supposed to remind you that he's trying to understand what he lost sight of. The silence that followed was thick, filled only by the distant rhythm of rain. Carmen stood. He still loves you, but he's learned that love without respect is just ego in disguise. Madeline wanted to reply, but the words wouldn't come. When Carmen left, she stayed there, eyes on the floor, tears threatening to fall. Why did it still hurt this much, even after everything? The weeks that followed were a slow rebuild. She threw herself into work with a kind of desperate energy, as if staying busy were the only way not to collapse. But the body tires, and the soul collects its dues. One evening she stayed late, alone among the dim lights and dusty shelves. The wind howled softly through the windows. Sitting at the central table, surrounded by piles of books, she whispered to herself, I loved him, and I still do. But love can't be a debt. The tears fell quietly. Their sound against the paper was the only noise in the night. Outside, the sky broke into rain. Each rumble of thunder echoed her own mix of longing and anger, of love and pride. Meanwhile, Lucas sat in a modest hotel room downtown. He had come back to Santa Fe without telling anyone. He needed to see the place, and maybe her, even if only from afar. The next morning, he walked the familiar streets. Turning a corner, he saw the library. The old sign was still there, and laughter drifted from inside. Children's voices, alive and bright. He stood watching for a long time. Madeline appeared in the doorway, helping an elderly man with a box of books. She laughed at something he said, and that sound, her laughter, broke him open all over again. He took a step forward, but stopped. She looked happy, peaceful even, and he didn't want to be the ghost who came back just to disturb what she'd fought so hard to rebuild. So he turned away, heart heavy. But before leaving, he slipped an envelope beneath a blue-covered book at the door. Inside there was only a short, honest note. I don't want to fix your world. I just want to see you smile in it. And if someday fate decides I've learned enough, maybe I'll have earned the right to hear your voice again. Madeline found the letter hours later, after the library had quieted. She recognized his handwriting instantly, but hesitated before opening it. Her hands trembled. When she finally read it, she sat still for a long time, her heart twisting. She walked to the front steps and sat down, watching the copper glow of the setting sun. The wind brushed softly through her hair, carrying a memory. That night when Lucas had said, maybe we just need to learn not to run from the right people. She smiled through her tears. And maybe, she whispered, we also need to learn to let go. She folded the letter, tucked it into her pocket and stayed until the last light faded. There was no anger left, no rush of emotion, only a quiet emptiness, the kind that comes when the heart starts to accept what love, no matter how real, can't yet hold. Time passed, leaves fell, and winter came. The library stood strong, alive, full of voices and warmth, and Madeline learned to breathe again. Not because the longing was gone, but because it had changed. It became something tender and bittersweet, like an old song that still stirs you, but no longer hurts. She moved forward, but she didn't forget. She kept his name tucked in the silent corners of her heart, that place where things live on, even when they never return. And Lucas, far away, learned to walk without trying to fix everything. He discovered the quiet grace of patience, of respecting someone else's time, of loving without demanding anything in return. Yet at night, when sleep refused to come, he still thought of her, of the woman who taught him that generosity isn't giving, but allowing the other to choose, and that love without freedom is just a cage dressed in flowers. One morning, Madeline arrived at the library and saw a note pinned to the front door, written in familiar handwriting. For every book you read, someone in the world rediscovers hope. A friend who learned that from you. She placed her hand over the paper and smiled, soft, genuine. She knew he still loved her, and in some quiet way, she still loved him too. But for the first time, that love didn't ache. It simply was, peaceful, gentle, whole. Time, patient as ever, began to stitch together what pride had torn apart. And though no wound ever heals without leaving a scar, theirs, invisible and deep, waited for the moment when they might meet again. Because sometimes love has to lose itself first, to learn how to find its way back home. Winter had finally loosened its grip on Santa Fe. The air was softer now, carrying the scent of damp earth and blooming flowers. It was the kind of morning that whispered of new beginnings, except for the one still locked inside Madeline's heart. Months had passed since Lucas's last letter. She had filled her days with purpose, new reading programs, partnerships with local schools, a literacy project for adults. The library was thriving again. And somewhere inside, so was she. But even with everything going well, there lingered a silence time hadn't erased. It wasn't pain, nor regret, just the absence of someone whose mark had been left not by what he gave, but by what he taught. Sometimes she still caught herself glancing toward the door, half expecting to see him there, standing as he once did, with that quiet smile and that gaze that carried the weight of 1,000 worlds, yet somehow still found space for hers. But the doorway remained empty. Far across the country, in a modest office overlooking the ocean, Lucas Bennett was beginning again. After months of solitude, he'd stepped away from Bennett Global and devoted himself to a new foundation, the Brooks Initiative, a non-profit supporting education and community libraries. The name, of course, was no accident. Carmen watched as he signed the final documents. "Are you sure about this, Mr. Bennett?" she asked softly. "Completely. And does she know?" He smiled faintly. "Not yet. Maybe she never will." Carmen crossed her arms, studying him. "Then why do it?" He looked out the window, the sea breeze stirring his hair. "Because sometimes love means doing good, even if no one ever sees it." Back in Santa Fe, Madeline answered a call that would change everything. "Miss Brooks, this is the Brooks Initiative. Your library has been selected to receive full restoration funding and educational support." Her hand trembled around the phone. "The Brooks Initiative?" "Yes, probably just a coincidence." "The donor remains anonymous, but the offer is real." Madeline sank into her chair, her pulse quickening. A coincidence? Or the universe playing gentle tricks again? The same name, the same message he once left in a letter. She swallowed hard. "And what's the Foundation's mission exactly?" "To rebuild the quiet places that change lives." She didn't answer. She just sat there, staring into nothing, her heart pounding like a soft knock from fate. Weeks later, trucks arrived, crews got to work, laughter returned to the halls. The scent of fresh paint filled the air. Children ran between boxes and books. The library pulsed with life again. Madeline coordinated it all, sleeves rolled up, smile genuine. But at night, when everything was still, she would sit on the steps outside and wonder, was it him? And if it was, why still hide? One evening, while sorting donated books, she found a folded note tucked among the pages. No name, no seal, just one line. "When love is real, it builds in silence." Her breath caught, her fingers shook, the handwriting, that unmistakable curve, that calm precision. It was him. Lucas kept his distance. Every week, Carmen sent him updates and photos of the progress. He never interfered, never asked for credit. He just watched from afar, letting her light fill the space, as it always should have. "She's shining," Carmen said one morning, showing him the pictures. Lucas smiled, his eyes soft. I never doubted she would. And how long will you keep hiding? Until her pride is only a memory, he murmured. And mine, too. But fate, as always, waits for the moment hearts are ready to meet again. On a bright Saturday morning, the city held a public ceremony for the library's reopening. There was music, laughter, children with ribbons in their hair. And in the center of it all stood Madeline, wearing a simple white dress, her face glowing with calm joy. The mayor gave his speech, praising the generous support of an anonymous foundation, but Madeline barely heard him. Something in the air, a familiar pull, made her turn toward the crowd. And there he was, standing quietly among the people, hands in his pockets, watching her with that same steady gaze, the one that saw her before the world ever did. For a heartbeat, she thought it was an illusion. But no, it was real. Lucas Bennett, the man she had loved and lost, standing under the morning sun, content just to witness what she had built. After the ceremony, when the crowd began to fade, she slipped out through the side gate. And there he was again, leaning against the wooden fence, watching the sunset. "So," she said softly, "it was you." Lucas turned slowly, a small, humble smile on his lips. "I promised I wouldn't try to fix things anymore. Just support them, from a distance." Madeline stepped closer, tears shimmering in her eyes. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you needed to know you could do all this without me. And now, he said quietly, "I just want to see you happy." She drew a deep breath, voice trembling. "I was so angry at you. I was angry at myself too." The silence that followed wasn't sharp like before. It was gentle, forgiving, the kind that comes when two people finally lay their burdens down. Madeline moved closer. "Lucas, what do you want from me now?" He looked at her, eyes tired but kind. "Nothing. I've already been given more than I deserve." For a moment she simply looked at him. Then, without thinking, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. It wasn't the kind of embrace that burns. It was the kind that heals. He froze for a second, then held her back, closing his eyes as the weight of time finally lifted. The sky glowed orange as the sun sank behind the mountains. They walked together toward the gate of the library. "You know," Madeline said with a half-smile, "when this all began, I thought you were just another rich man pretending to be ordinary. And now I see you're just a man trying to learn what love really means." He laughed softly. "And what about you? What did you learn?" "That love doesn't need to fix," she said. "It just needs to stay." The wind played with her hair. Lucas looked at the horizon, then back at her. "Can I stay a while?" She smiled. "You can, but no promises this time." "No promises," he said gently. "Only presence." And they stood there, side by side, quiet, whole. No dramatic confessions, no rehearsed apologies, just two hearts that had finally found the same rhythm, the rhythm of peace. As night fell, the library lights flickered on for the first time since the renovation. Through the windows, warm golden light spilled out, and in it, two faces reflected not perfection, but understanding. Madeline turned to him and whispered, "Did you know true love doesn't have to be grand?" He smiled. "And I spent a lifetime learning that. From you." When he left that night, she didn't cry. There was no sadness, no longing, only peace. The quiet knowing that they were both where they needed to be. She stood at the door, watching his car disappear around the corner. The new library sign gleamed under the moonlight, and for the first time in forever, love no longer felt like a wound. It felt like strength, a presence that didn't hold her down, but helped her stand tall. And there, beneath the wide Santa Fe sky, Madeline whispered to herself, "This is how love is meant to be, free and true." Time at last had settled into calm. The days no longer felt heavy. The library restored and full of life, thrived again. Children raced between the aisles, old friends swapped stories, and Madeline spent her afternoons reviewing new projects with an easy, peaceful smile. On the surface, everything seemed perfect. But deep down, a quiet echo still lived within her, the memory of his voice, the touch of a hand that no longer promised anything, but still managed to say everything. Since their reunion at the reopening, they hadn't spoken again. The conversation had ended in an embrace, yet that single gesture lingered between them, like the last note of a song that refuses to fade. Madeline felt it, that something unfinished still hovered. Forgiveness had come, yes, but the road back required something rarer than emotion, rebuilt trust, and Lucas knew it. He knew that one wrong move could turn love back into a wound. So this time, he chose patience to prove himself not with words, but with consistency. Over the next few weeks, he began showing up again at the library, not as before, with grand gestures or hidden intentions, just as someone who wanted to be near. He stacked books, read stories to the children, fixed things that broke. Sometimes he stayed for hours, quietly watching Madeline work, without asking for anything in return. At first, she pretended not to notice, but her eyes always betrayed her heart. One afternoon, he appeared carrying a toolbox. She laughed. "Don't tell me you've become a full-time volunteer now. If I said it's just an excuse to be near the prettiest librarian in the state, would you kick me out? Maybe I'd give you more boxes to carry." They laughed, freely, easily. For the first time in a long while, their laughter carried no trace of old pain. As the days passed, their bond slowly rewove itself. No declarations, no endless apologies, just gestures, presence. The quiet kind of care he'd never learned to value before. When she forgot to eat, he'd bring soup in glass jars. When a pipe burst in the children's room, he showed up with his sleeves rolled up. When her computer froze, he fixed it in seconds, and she would grumble, smiling, "I hate that you always have the answers." "This time it's just tech," he'd reply, "no interference." Their love had crossed a long storm, and at last it had learned how to breathe without fear. One afternoon, Madeline invited him to join her on a school visit, a talk about reading and dreams in a small, underfunded neighborhood. He said yes immediately. The school was humble, peeling walls, concrete floors, barefoot children. Madeline spoke with fire in her eyes, bringing laughter and light to everyone in the room. Lucas stayed in the back, just watching her, full of quiet admiration. A small girl tugged on his sleeve. "Are you her husband?" she asked. He blinked, surprised. "No, not yet, I guess." "You should be," she said seriously. "She talks about you when she thinks no one's listening." He swallowed hard, a single innocent truth, cutting deeper than any speech ever could. On the drive back, silence filled the car. The wind played with Madeline's hair as she watched the road. Finally, Lucas found his courage. "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead. Did you really forgive me?" She sighed softly. "I understood you. And sometimes, that's harder than forgiveness." He nodded, smiling faintly. "So what now?" "Now we start over. The right way." She turned toward him, steady but kind. No grand promises, no fixing what the other feels, just presence, patience, and truth. He looked at her, like a man receiving a gift he'd never expected to be given again. "Then let me try." "You already are," she said, smiling, "and you're doing well." In the months that followed, they built something entirely new. Madeline brought him into her community projects, and Lucas, for the first time, learned to listen more than speak. They disagreed sometimes, but without harm. They learned how to argue without breaking each other. One evening, after a local event, they sat together on the library steps. The city lights shimmered against the glass, and the air carried the sweet scent of trees. "It's funny," Madeline said, watching the skyline. I spent so long afraid of depending on someone that I forgot partnership can also be strength. And I spent so long trying to be the solution that I forgot love doesn't need an action plan." They laughed, the sound mixing with the soft hum of the night. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was peaceful, like two souls finally breathing in sync. Lucas reached for her hand gently. "You know, Madeline, I don't want to fix the world anymore. I just want to share mine with you." Her eyes glistened. "Then let it be like that. Two worlds, not blended but shared." He nodded. And when he kissed her, there was no urgency, no fear, only calm. The kiss of two people who had finally learned that real love isn't control, it's choice. In time, Lucas began spending part of each month in Santa Fe. He set up a small office inside the library, not as an executive, but as a volunteer. He managed the tech area, taught teens to use computers, and always insisted that Madeline was the real director. She'd laugh, teasing, "So now you work for me?" "I think I always have," he'd answer with a wink. They walked side by side between shelves and laughter, living a routine that seemed almost too simple for such an unlikely love story. But simplicity, at last, was where their story truly belonged. One evening, Lucas drove her to the hill overlooking the city to watch the sunset. They sat on the hood of the car with a blanket and a bottle of wine. The sky was painted in gold and lilac. "I used to be terrified I'd never find you again," he said quietly. "And I was afraid I'd lose myself again," she replied. "But I think the right kind of love gives you back to yourself." He watched her for a long moment. "I still fall for you every time you smile," he whispered. She laughed softly. "That's dangerous." "It's inevitable." The wind lifted a few strands of her hair, and he tucked one gently behind her ear. A small gesture, yet it carried everything they'd become. Later that night, back at the library, Madeline looked at the glowing sign above the door and thought of all they had been through. The pain, the pride, the silence, the countless turns of fate, all of it had led them here, and for the first time, she felt they were truly ready. No rush, no fear, no need to prove anything to anyone. Just two hearts that had finally learned how to walk side by side without losing themselves. And in that quiet certainty, she understood. Their love was no longer about dependence or control. It was about partnership. The kind of love that doesn't need to be announced, only lived. The kind that stays. Spring arrived in Santa Fe like a letter of good news. The streets smelled of wildflowers again, laughter filled the markets, and the sky was painted in gold and blue. Inside the library, the sound of children reading and keyboards clicking had replaced the heavy silence of earlier days. Madeline moved through the aisles with quiet grace, a peace not born of ease, but of balance. She was now officially the director of the city's community programs. Lucas had urged her to accept the position, but she only agreed after he swore never to use the Bennett name on anything related to the library. "No charity in disguise?" she'd asked. "No ego pretending to be kindness," he'd replied, and he kept his word. The months that followed were a mosaic of simple joys. They learned to share a home without losing their independence. Lucas cooked badly on weekends, and Madeline pretended to enjoy it. She read aloud at night, and he pretended not to tear up at certain lines. Mr. Whiskers, now the undisputed ruler of the household, sprawled on the couch like a lazy monarch, keeping his watchful eye on them both. Their house was small, but full of life, books stacked in every corner, a plant that refused to live, and photos pinned to the fridge with mismatch magnets. No one walking by would ever guess that the man inside had once run a billion-dollar empire. And maybe that was Lucas's greatest victory, finding peace in what money could never buy. One rainy evening, Madeline was curled up on the couch under a blanket, with Mr. Whiskers asleep in her lap, and a documentary about cats playing softly on TV. Lucas walked in, holding 2 mugs of hot chocolate, wearing that odd look of nervous tenderness. "You okay?" she asked, laughing. "You look like you're about to confess to a crime." "Maybe I am," he said, sitting beside her. For a moment they simply listened to the gentle voice on the TV, the rhythm of the rain. Then she noticed him watching her with that calm, searching intensity. "What?" "I was just thinking," he said, running a hand through his hair, "about how strange life is." "Strange?" "Yeah. I spent half my life thinking love was control, and the other half trying to prove to you that I learned it isn't." She smiled softly. "And did you learn?" "I think I did." He took a deep breath, looked down at the cat and said, "Madeline Brooks, have you noticed all our important talks happen with Mr. Whiskers present?" "That's because he's the only one who doesn't interrupt," she teased. Lucas fidgeted, setting his mug down. Then he pulled something from his pocket, a small blue velvet box. Madeline froze, eyes wide. "Lucas, what is that?" "Wait," he blurted, flustered. "It's not what it looks like. I mean, it is, but not in the formal way." "You're proposing?" she asked, half laughing, half stunned. "Trying to," he admitted. "Badly, but trying." He opened the box. Inside was a simple silver ring, engraved on the inside, "Without fixing, just love." Madeline covered her mouth, her eyes filling instantly. "Lucas, I know we're not perfect, and I don't want us to be. I don't want a fairy tale ending, Madeline. I want the real thing. The mornings you're mad at me, the coffee I burn, the silences only we understand. I want all of it, with you." She laughed through tears. "That's easily the most imperfect proposal I've ever heard." "Good," he smiled. "We've never been the perfect type of anything." The silence that followed was light and full. Mr. Whiskers stretched, as if to give his royal approval. Madeline looked at him and said, "I think we just got a yes from His Majesty." "And yours?" Lucas asked softly. She took a breath, eyes glistening. "Yes, Lucas, 1,000 times yes, but on one condition." "Name it. You never try to save me again." "Deal," he said, "as long as you let me love you without asking permission." They both laughed, the kind of laughter that comes from relief and homecoming all at once. He slid the ring onto her finger, slightly crooked, clumsy, but so careful that she nearly cried again. Then he kissed her gently, the way he always did, a kiss that promised nothing but presence. Life didn't turn into a perfect montage after that. They argued about small things, forgot anniversaries, debated who slept more. But their love had grown roots, steady, mature, alive. One afternoon, Madeline found Lucas sitting on the library steps, surrounded by teenagers he was helping write resumes. She stood there for a long while, watching. The man who once tried to fix the world with money now offered something rarer: time, patience, humility. When he looked up and caught her watching, he smiled, the smile that had always belonged only to her. As the sun began to set, she called out, "Lucas, yeah? You know I love you more when you forget you're Lucas Bennett." He laughed, standing. "Then I must be doing great, because I forget that all the time." She took his hand, and together they walked back inside, waving to the kids. The sunlight poured through the windows, painting the air gold. It felt like the universe itself was quietly blessing them. Months later, the wedding took place. No grandeur, no luxury. Just friends, soft lights, and live music. The ceremony was held in the library garden. The children made flower crowns, and Mr. Whiskers, wearing a tiny blue bow tie, walked down the aisle with the rings, pausing halfway to take a nap. Madeline cried with joy. Lucas, visibly nervous, held her hands. "I never thought love could be this peaceful," he whispered. "Me neither," she replied. "But maybe that's what makes it real." When they kissed, the wind lifted petals into the air like quiet applause. For a heartbeat, everything stopped. Time, sound, fear. There was only love, Imperfect, true, eternal in its simplicity. Later that night, back home, they sat on the couch with Mr. Whiskers sleeping between them. Madeline looked at Lucas and smiled. "You realize..." "What?" "Our story started with a mistake and turned into the most beautiful thing I've ever gotten right." He squeezed her hand. "And to think it all began with $200 and a fake date, and ended with a crooked ring and a spoiled cat. Sounds like a perfect ending to me." "Imperfect," she corrected, laughing, "but perfect." He kissed her forehead. Outside, the rain began again, soft, like distant applause. And inside that small, light-filled house, love, the kind that doesn't fix, but sustains, had finally found its forever home. Months after the wedding, life had become something simple, yet full of purpose. There was no luxury, no fairy tale routine, just real life. The alarm that rang too early, the coffee that cooled before the first sip, the cat who always chose to nap in the middle of the work table. And in the middle of it all, a love that stayed alive, not because of grand gestures, but because of constancy. Madeline now directed the community programs of Santa Fe. The library, once on the brink of collapse, had become a center of culture, comfort, and hope. Lucas, in turn, had become part of that world, not as a hero, not as a businessman, but as a man learning to live without needing to prove anything. People saw them together and would say, "They have something different, something you can't quite explain." And maybe they were right, because their love wasn't about eternal promises. It was about daily presence. But the simple act of staying, even when the spark of the beginning had turned into a gentle, steady light at home. One warm Sunday afternoon, Madeline sat on the porch reading a book while the wind turned the pages on its own. Lucas appeared with 2 cups of tea and sat beside her. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky with shades of gold. Mr. Whiskers slept at their feet, purring as if blessing the moment. "Remember how all this started?" Lucas asked. Madeline smiled. "With a mix-up and a terrible dinner." "Fate has a sense of humor, and terrible timing," she replied, laughing. He looked at the horizon for a moment. "You know what I learned from you, Madeline? That cats are better than CEOs?" she teased. He chuckled. "That too, but mostly that love isn't about saving or fixing. It's about walking beside someone, staying close when they stumble, without rushing to repair, without being afraid to feel." She looked at him tenderly. "And I learned that letting someone take care of you isn't weakness, it's courage. Then we're even." "Finally," she said, resting her head on his shoulder. The silence that followed was the kind that only exists between people who have already said everything and still want to keep talking. The sun sank slowly. Inside, the clock on the wall read 6:17 p.m. Outside, the sound of children playing blended with the whisper of the trees. The world felt at peace. Madeline closed her book and looked at him. "Do you think we got lucky?" Lucas thought for a moment before answering. "Luck and choice. We chose to stay, even when leaving would have been easier." She nodded. "That's what love is, isn't it? Staying. But because you want to, not because you have to." He smiled, his gaze the same as that first night. Calm, sincere, full of soul. Madeline leaned her forehead against his and whispered, "Thank you for letting me be who I am. Thank you for teaching me what it really means to be." Outside, the wind blew softly, making the curtains dance, and the lazy cat opened one eye as if to make sure everything was still in its place. And it was. Time passed, as it always does, but their love remained, not the kind made of vows and declarations, but the kind that learns to exist within imperfection. The kind that understands life doesn't have to be perfect to be beautiful. It just has to be shared with someone who understands the silence, respects your space, and holds your hand when the world feels heavy. Because in the end, true love doesn't shout, demand, or insist. It simply stays. And so, between books, laughter, tea, and a sleepy cat, Madeline and Lucas discovered that love doesn't need to change the world to be eternal. It only needs to change, gently, who we are inside. And maybe deep down, this is also a story about all of us, about what happens when life forces us to break, so we can finally learn how to love the right way. If this story touched your heart, leave a like. It helps share messages of love that speak to the soul. Subscribe to the channel to keep following stories like this one, and tell us in the comments, where are you listening from? Your support keeps this space alive, a place where imperfect love always finds the most beautiful ending, a new beginning.